My name is John Ruddick from the Libertarian Party, and I believe in a 5-year immigration pause.
And we start banning this symbol, then we've got to ban more and more and more and more. Then we are slipping down this slippery slope very quickly. We say we can abolish the state or phase the state out entirely.
I don't think there's much doubt, what Epstein was. It was a Middle East intelligence agent.
And we can become a very wealthy, successful, happy, prosperous country. We can be a city on a hill. We can be an example to the rest of the world.
You're tuned into Backbench Drivers. I'm your host, John Lawson, and joining me this week is a very special guest. We've got John Ruddick here from the New South Wales Libertarian Party, and he's joining us to discuss a lot of topics that fall right in his wheelhouse, particularly a raft of anti-freedom legislation and just general moves from our government, which are very contradictory to both libertarian values and I'd say also Australian values. And so it's a topic which affects both nationalists and libertarians. Anyone that loves Australia, that's patriotic, should be disturbed by all these recent anti-freedom laws, restricting freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and various other freedoms of expression that we have in this country. So without further ado, welcome onto the pod, John.
Thanks very much for having me, John.
No, thank you for joining us. We'll jump right into it. Obviously, the impetus that has led to all of these laws being put into place or being suggested has been the recent tragic Bondi shooting. And I right away wanted to ask you, we've seen these kinds of tragedies before, maybe not on this scale, not of this magnitude all the time, but we often do see catastrophes being weaponized to pass laws which affect everyday Australians and really don't seem to affect those who are most likely to commit these kinds of terror attacks, crime, anything like that. What are your thoughts on these kinds of laws? Do you think that they're going to be effective? And do you think that they're the right way to solve the problems that we saw at Bondi?
Well, I think all these laws will be counterproductive. I think that they will make a situation worse. Okay, and this is what I said in the Parliament. Okay, so when they're bringing in these anti-free speech laws, there were already laws against ISIS flags and Nazi flags and everything and symbols and stuff. Now what they've done is they've doubled the penalties. In some cases, made it worse. Okay, so more time in jail, more time, bigger fines. Now, what does that do? Okay, let's say you're a bit of a troubled 16-year-old and you are interested in radical Islam and you're sort of wavering, you might go and join some, really hardcore little jihadi group. And the people that are trying to get you in are going to say to you, hey, we're so powerful, we're so important, we're rising in influence that Parliament has had to pass these laws specifically about us. Then someone who's wavering might say, wow, well, I want to be in. You guys are really important. Now, the better approach is to ignore them. Okay, now look, the bigger issue here is the immigration issue, but we'll deal with that later. So these laws, now look, they used to, who invented this, who got this ball rolling on banning the swastika? Okay, I'm 55, John. I can't ever remember seeing a swastika in Australia being publicly displayed. I can't remember it, okay? But then Dan Andrews, in the middle of COVID, he comes up with this idea, we're going to ban the swastika, we're going to ban the swastika. And then, of course, the media and all the other political parties say, well, who can disagree with that? Okay, now one politician did in Victoria, David Limbrick, the Libertarian, okay, because we are free speech absolutists. Now, he definitely ain't a Nazi, David Limbrick. But he said, look, it's a slippery slope. And we start banning this symbol, then we've got to ban more and more and more and more. Then we are slipping down this slippery slope very quickly. Okay, so once Victoria did it, and I think in 2022, all the other states had to do it. We're going to ban the swastika too. Okay, then what they have to do, then that means that people that want publicity go and get themselves arrested over these things. Now, you don't spend that much time in jail, but gee, you make the Channel 9 news, 6 o'clock news, you get into the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, all publicity. So this is what is making, people, very small groups on the radical right or the Islamic, the Islamic fringe, makes them more popular. So in the United States, they had the good sense, the wise sense to, in the around 1790, just after when they got their independence from Britain, they decided a few years later, when we need a federal constitution, which I would personally be opposed to. I liked what they had before, the Articles of Confederation. Anyway, after they bring in this central government, the libertarians of the day, people like, the anti-federalists, people like Thomas Jefferson, many other good people say, well, look, if we're going to have a federal government, we need a Bill of Rights. We need a Bill of Rights to restrain the power of the federal government. Thank God they did that. Now, I think Jefferson was not there, but he was involved through letters, etc. Anyway, at the top of the Bill of Rights is, that the Congress won't pass any laws to abridge the ability of the people to speak freely. Okay, now if you don't want someone to speak freely in your property or at your business, you're very welcome to do that. So it's not saying free speech everywhere for everyone, but it is saying the government cannot shut people up. So because they have that rule, what that means is in the United States, if someone wants to go out and say ISIS is great or Hitler is great, okay, they can say it, they don't get arrested, they don't get the publicity, and it doesn't become a big deal. So all these laws, I believe the ABC and the Sydney Morning Herald and all the media that keeps talking about Nazis and ISIS, I believe that they are their PR agent, inadvertently, but they are making these groups more prominent and therefore, having more members and supporters. So it's all incredibly stupid, and it's a bad laws, John, are passed as a knee-jerk reaction to a terrible tragedy. We should always sort of wait 3 to 6 months to let emotions settle down, okay, and we'll not rush into things. But what happens in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy is that the media and probably most of the public, they say, well, we've got to do something. Well, who's going to do something? Politicians. And what can politicians do? Pass laws. So they've passed these laws, and it's all bad. Now, I tried to move sunset clauses. These things we're going to get through, the gun stuff, the anti-gun stuff, and the anti-free speech stuff, they were going to get through, we knew immediately, because the Liberal Party said they'd basically agree with everything that Premier Minns said. And just on Premier Minns, Mark Latham has given him a nickname, which I really like, Ho Chi Mints. Okay, I like it. So I think we should get that into circulation. So it was going to get through. So here at the Libertarian Party, we said, okay, well, since these laws are going to get through, of course we voted against it, we spoke against it, but it was going to get through. I said, well, look, let's have an amendment. Let's have a sunset clause. So these things expire after a year. No, not interested. So these are now the permanent law of the land, okay? So, the repeal campaign as starts today.
And you guys have been fighting it hard. Let's go into depth on each one of these sort of laws that we've seen passed or are currently in the process of being passed on the various different issues. I think we should start, first of all, with, I think, an issue that a lot of Aussies are very uncomfortable discussing, which is gun laws. And obviously, guns were immediately blamed right out of the gate for the Bondi Massacre. I think that's ridiculous. I think that completely misses the problem. And I think it's actually dangerous because if we don't address the real root cause of what caused that shooting, and I don't think that's ambiguous at all, I think that is clearly a result of radical Islam and multiculturalism. But nonetheless, I digress. Guns clearly aren't the issue because I think within the week after the Bondi attack, a similar attempted copycat attack, alleged, because none of it was managed to be proved by the police. But there were 2 cars full of young Muslim men driving up from Victoria to Bondi, talking about Bondi 2.0. One of them had ties to ISIS, which was proven by the police, and they were rammed off the road by New South Wales police. And of course, I think what is an interesting detail in that case is that no weapons were found in that vehicle. Now, I don't think it takes a genius to put together that they were probably planning something, and we don't know exactly what, but clearly they weren't going to carry out that something using actual legally registered firearms like were used in the Bondi attack. So already just a week after, we saw the ridiculousness of gun restrictions in preventing these future attacks. So many of them are committed with knives, illegal firearms, that it completely undermines any concept of gun restrictions preventing future attacks like this. What's your take, and what's the libertarian take on the gun restrictions that have been suggested and passed?
Well, look, just on that, what you're saying is allegedly, potentially a second attack. Now, look, I do agree it did look odd that a couple of carloads from Melbourne had driven up to Sydney. But look, they were questioned. They were let go by the cops, who said there's no charges here. So I think we sort of do have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But in terms of, yes, look, there's many, many other ways. If there's just no such thing as a gun in Australia and you want to do a mass murder, there's many, many ways to do it. Okay, so we're not going to go through them because, we don't want to give people bad ideas. But in the United States, the state that has the most liberal gun laws, and I mean liberal as in free, as in pro-gun laws, is New Hampshire. New Hampshire has never had a massacre, one of these random massacres. I think like 20, 30 years ago, someone who was upset with the local council went and shot up 3 people because he was cranky about something. That was 3 people. Okay, but there's never been a massacre. Now, why is that? That's because in New Hampshire, if you want to go into McDonald's or you want to go and buy a cup of tea, you can have a concealed pistol in your pocket. Okay, so if you are a really evil, crazy person, you want to go shoot people up, well, there's no point doing it in New Hampshire because they might be crazy gunmen, but they're not that crazy because they know that, there'll be several people around them who'll take them out in 2 seconds. And I wish that would be the case in Bondi. If, there's all these people who are making videos of what was going on, and look, those videos are helpful. We need to see what happens. But I would have preferred someone to have a pistol in their pocket and to take them down real quick. That would have been better. Now, in the libertarian world, there is a broad spectrum of, ideas across a lot of different subjects. But one thing that we are all united about is that we believe in the right to bear arms. And this is why the magnificent Americans in their Bill of Rights put it in there at number 2 behind free speech. Now, why do libertarians believe in the right to bear arms so passionately? Because Mao Zedong was an evil bastard, arguably the worst person of the 20th century because his death toll is higher than anybody else, okay? And he was an absolute psycho when it came to Marxism. He was trying to outdo the Soviet Union in the 1960s in saying, we're the most pure Marxists. Anyway, he was right about one thing. Mao Zedong said, real power comes out of the barrel of a gun. And he's exactly right about that. All power that governments has does not come from democratic elections. It comes because the government has a massive supply of weapons. So what libertarians say is, well, all governments will over time grow, as we've just seen in response to Bondi with the anti-free speech laws and the anti-gun laws. Governments are like a cancer. They keep growing. There's a crisis comes along. COVID comes along, global financial crisis, 9/11. They have to keep growing the government. So how do we keep the government in check? Well, if the people have got guns, it means that there's a counterbalance to the power of the state. And this is why, America can have bad governments, but they can't really become a tyranny because the people can come out onto the street and rise up. And because the people do have that power, then the government does, to a large extent, stay in the box. This is why when we went through the COVID psychodrama, okay, the official statistics, and I think they're accurate in Australia, 98% of people took 2 stupid warp speed vaccines. In America, it was closer to about 70%, still a majority, but a big gap between America and Australia. And I believe that was because they had the same psyop going on, their bosses, their corporates, the media, the government, the courts, the academics, everyone was saying, take your vax, take your vax, take your vax. But 30% of Americans said, nah, I'm not listening to you. You can't force me to do it. Good on them. But in Australia, we are farm animals because John Howard has largely disarmed us. So the government can get away with anything. And that's why we had a 2-year lockdown in this beautiful country. Okay, stupid. So guns are absolutely critical. And it's not just to stop a tyranny, it's also to stop an invasion. Now, we should assume that at some point in the next 200 years, that there will be like an Asian Napoleon. who just decides to go marching around and conquering places. We should assume that. I think it's probably unlikely, but who knows what's going to happen in the next 200 years. Now, if Australia's sitting here at the moment, the only defence we've got is the ADF, the Australian Defence Force. But that Asian Napoleon might come in and take out our Defence Force, and then we're just sitting ducks. Then they can just come in and, we're still a wealthy country, and they'll just take everything. If, on the other hand, they think that the Australians are like the Americans, where every second house has got a firearm, and some houses have got 10 or more, then that foreign invader is going to think to themselves, okay, well, we can take out their Air Force and their Army and their submarines and their Navy ships and everything else, but occupying this country is going to be really difficult because they've got guns. So for two extremely important macro issues, tyranny, to prevent a tyranny and to prevent an invasion, that's why it's a good idea to have guns. And I believe the more guns there are in a society, the more polite the society is. People don't go and blow their top because they think, oh, well, look, this person's potentially powerful. It also stops street crime and break and enters. Now, what's something that is not discussed often about gun laws in America is that they do a massive, there's something like 98% of potential violent crimes don't happen and don't get reported. Let's say some little punk walks into a 7-Eleven and it says, with a knife and says, hand over your money, and the shopkeeper pulls out a gun. Now, the punk just runs out the shop. That usually doesn't get reported to the cops. But so many crimes are prevented from happening because, people just brandish a gun. They don't shoot the gun, but they deter a crime that way. That happens a lot. Now, we all know that there are a lot of gun deaths in America. Overwhelmingly, this is inner city crime gangs, okay? And that where they've in states like New York, California, Illinois, where there are lots of gun laws already, okay? But the criminals still get the guns. And one last thing I'd like to say about the guns is it's primitive technology right now, but it's fast evolving, and that is 3D printed guns. So the government may not like it, okay, but this is the reality that's coming our way. People, I'd give it sort of 10, 15 years. People are going to be able to manufacture. It'll be illegal in Australia, but they're still going to be able to do it. They're going to be able to manufacture guns quite simply. Now, I think they can do it at the moment, but they only get sort of one shot before they blow themselves up. So with time, the government should be accepting this reality, that there's going to be an armed population. So what we have at the moment is the government, the biggest bunch of criminals in the minds of the libertarian, they've got unlimited weapons, and the criminals have got weapons. The average law-abiding citizen, which is 95% of us, we're sitting ducks. We're sitting ducks because of what John Howard did in the 1990s, what Chris Minns is doing now, and I'm sure Mr. Albanese's not far behind.
And I think all that's very relevant because we're growing a increasingly multicultural population here as well. And it was one consideration of our Federation fathers that they didn't want to replicate the same kinds of, this might be controversial to voters of the Libertarian Party, but the kind of racial strife that they had in America, where you had these competing populations that did have animosity for each other, Black Americans, white Americans, and increasingly over there you have Hispanic gangs and things like that. We might dip into the Venezuela situation later on, which is tangential, but over here we're developing a similar situation where we have African crime gangs, we have Middle Eastern crime gangs and Asian crime gangs, and I guess less and less so, you have the Irish, the Italians, but they're still kicking around to some degree, but we're becoming a increasingly dangerous country in certain parts of our cities, and part of that is because guns are restricted and self-defense is very limited for law-abiding citizens, but seemingly for these criminals, they can easily get their hands on, we don't even have to go into 3D printed guns, they can get their hands on illegal weapons, they can get their hands on knives, they can get their hands on blunt objects. It really doesn't matter. I think what we're missing the point with talking about gun restrictions to try and prevent terror attacks is that the problem originates in someone's mind. It doesn't originate at the point where they pick up a weapon. If somebody's committed to doing so and committed to taking so many lives horrifically as we saw in the Bondi attack, the problem's gone on for a very long time before they reach that stage of radicalization. And this is something that you have talked about, especially your March for Australia speech. and on our previous podcasts, we should be looking into restrictions on multiculturalism rather than on guns, on speech, and all of these things. We should be cutting things off right at the source. A 10-year or a 5-year, I know that you've probably advocated more for the 10-year, immigration ban would do wonders for preventing increases in radicalization, increases in violent crime from certain foreign crime gangs. And the gun ban really is going to have a very minimal effect, I believe, on reducing these kinds of attacks in the future, which makes it it makes it so recklessly irresponsible that it could almost be directly correlated with the taking of more lives in the future. If you're a politician that supports these kinds of measures, speech bans, gun bans, but not looking into revising our concept of multiculturalism being a always great thing with no downsides, you're almost directly responsible for any of these future attacks that go on. And I don't think that that is much of an exaggeration at all. We can sort of go on to another really important topic, which is the protest ban. That's another one of these huge areas which has been restricted in the wake of the Bondi shooting, which is Chris Minns. He led the charge. He wanted to put a 3-month ban on protesting, and I believe it did pass in the New South Wales Parliament.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think you've definitely heard about this, exempted from that ban is the pro-Aboriginal anti-Australia Invasion Day march, which takes place every day on Australia Day. Minns did say that won't be blocked by these protest laws. Did you have anything to say on the topic of banning protests as a means of preventing terror attacks?
Look, I wasn't aware that Ho Chi Minh had said that the anti-Australia Day protest by Indigenous groups and others was permitted, but it doesn't. It's horrible. It's I suppose it shouldn't surprise me. These laws are applied one-sided. This is why we don't support them. People like Tony Abbott go out there and say, well, we should apply the laws equally against all groups. No, the Libertarian Party says we shouldn't have the laws in the first place, and we're right and Tony Abbott's wrong. But this is appalling. There is a 2-tier level of justice. It's against right-wingers across the spectrum, okay, whether they're COVID people or anti-immigration people or whatever. And they turn a blind eye to left-wing stuff. And so, that is appalling in itself. Now, the thing about protests is I reckon 95% of Australians are going to go through their life without ever having attended one protest, left or right. And most people think, it's just not their scene. Okay, that's fine. But protests across history have been powerful movements, okay, and they often do change government policy. We're not in Australia, but all around the world. We'll see what's happening in Iran at the moment, okay? So having the right to protest is absolutely fundamental. And that's in the US First Amendment. It's not just about free speech. It says the government will not have the ability to stop the people peacefully assembling. So what Ho Chi Minh has done is I think he's brought in this rule where he can just unilaterally, him or his police commissioner can unilaterally say, no protest anywhere in New South Wales for 14 days. But if before the end of the 14 days, he can then extend it again and just keep extending it. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the March for Australia, which I am looking forward to on the 26th of January. Look, the thing is, even with these new laws, there can still be a major gathering, okay? But if that protest is in place, you can't have a march through the street. You don't get police protection. Okay, but we could still go to a big park. They can't stop us doing that. So, but look, I'm impressed with what they're doing at March for Australia. So I'm sure that they're all on top of that. Now, most protests up until recent years have always been left-wingers protesting about something. And, I can't ever remember right-wing governments saying, if you can call a Liberal Party government right-wing, they used to be, up until the last sort of 20, 30 years. I can't ever remember, let's go back to the Vietnam era. Now, they were big protests. I can't remember Liberal governments saying, we're going to ban these protests. They might have criticised the protests, but they never talked about banning them. But now that the left is the establishment, We have COVID protests, we're anti-immigration protests. They're just itching to use the violence of the state to find a way to ban them. Okay, this is because, you scratch the average leftist and there's an authoritarian just underneath the surface.
It seems pretty undeniable. Really interesting that exempting left-wing protests was just automatic for Minns, particularly because some of the biggest protests we've seen recently were the pro-Palestine protests. I'm someone that is sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, that is very critical of the Israeli government. I know that you marched with the Free Palestine protests as well, John, as did Bob Carr, many other notable politicians as well, a lot of reputable people. And although we can be critical of Israel and sympathetic to Palestine, it is interesting that it's really the left, in combination with Muslims, that could be said to be fomenting this atmosphere of quote-unquote anti-Semitism, which, once again, I'm very skeptical of that claim. But nonetheless, the left is pretty much being totally ignored for criticism by Albo. And yet he's still found time to call out right-wing extremists, so to speak. He's gone back to the 80s to bring up alleged attacks, which, again, was a very contested case. And, I don't support violence in any form, but nonetheless, to go back to that far to try to bring up a case of right-wing extremist attacks on Australian soil is very telling, I think, that they have to reach that far to blame the right and to blame nationalists for something that happened just last year, and very clearly can be linked to the modern political mix of the left-wing extremism and radical Islamism. That being said, I think that we can have a look at the situation in New South Wales with Minns, and he has been quite critical of the left, so to speak, and he said that they do need to do an investigation into Labor. I think that does speak to how, once again, these catastrophes are used for political ends. While Albanese is going out and blaming nationalists and far right for anti-Semitism, you've got Minns saying, well, hold on, we should investigate our own party and my factional opponents, and we'll root them out of the party. So it does show how at different levels you've got that breakdown in narrative based on what is useful, what the message is most useful for between Albo and Minns. I think you had something to add to that.
Well, according to the best research I can do, since 9/11 in Australia, so that's a quarter of a century ago now, I count 11 jihadi-inspired violent attacks. Lint Cafe, Bondi, and other people driving a car around in Melbourne, and a few knife attacks. But there's 11, and I count 2. Far right violent attacks. I think in the, sort of around 2002, 2003, there was some Chinese restaurants in Perth bombed, something like that. Now, and no one died. Okay, so we're not saying that extreme right violence is not an issue, but boy, oh boy, it's minuscule, and it's not escalating. Okay, it's like a couple of little things happened. It was against Chinese, not against Jews. Okay, not good, of course. But the jihadi attacks, and it's not just in Australia. It's in Germany, it's in Sweden, it's in the UK, it's in France. Okay, so it's really disgusting when they keep talking. I mean, if you didn't know about the real world, but you just read the corporate media, you would think, oh my God, these far right people in Australia they're a growing menace. They're a big threat. No, that's not the case. They're lying. And why are they lying? Okay, because, let's say 45% of the people in Australia generally vote for a left-wing party. 45% of people will generally vote for a right-wing party. Then you've got 10%, the people who decide elections, the uninformed, uninterested dummies in the middle who wouldn't be voting if it wasn't compulsory. Those dummies are very easily persuadable, and they have to vote. So then when we have the political leaders and the corporate media saying, oh, the far right, it's a big danger, it's a big impending danger, dummies think, oh, God, well, gee, that doesn't sound good. I better vote for the left-wing party. That's what it's all about. It's all about trying to frighten people about what is very close to being a non-existent threat. And it's not just in Australia. Now, in America, when was the last time some right-winger did something bad? Well, it was pretty bad. Timothy McVeigh. Now, what was that? That was like 35 years ago. I know there's some controversy about that, but I mean, I think it's what the face value story is probably accurate. Now, he was a right-winger. He was an anti-government guy who blew up a government building and killed, I think about 200 people. Pretty bad. Okay, but I mean, these things, has there been a pattern of it, or was it a one-off? Well, I think it was a one-off. Look, there was a guy in South Carolina a few years ago who shot up a Nazi guy, and he shot up a black church, killed about, I think, 6 people. So these things happen, okay? We don't live in a utopia, okay? But I mean, these are isolated and one-off, okay? And then when you even get down to the lower level, right, the non-violent level, but you go to lefties are more inclined to be engaged in violence, okay? And right-wingers are generally more sort of, genteel and nicer. Even if people say they might be far right or go extreme right or whatever, generally quite peaceful people in terms of their private lives, whereas lefties can't help themselves. They, of course, not all of them, but they've got that element there where they are capable of going a bit crazy. So, yes, it's really disgusting what they're doing, saying that, the far right is an emerging threat. Now look, I've never met Joel Davis in my life. I don't follow him on social media. He does pop up on my feed. I hear people talking about him. I know he's banned from everywhere. Now, look, he was foolish in saying what he said about a couple of politicians. Okay, but boy, oh boy, I am very, very disturbed, as I think all people who care about liberty in this country, regardless of what Joel Davis stands for, I think they should be very concerned about the really cruel conditions that he is suffering. Now, his wife's just had a baby, or his partner's just had a baby. Now, there are reports, very credible reports, that he's in like super solitary confinement, doesn't have access to books. He's going to be bored out of his brain, can only shower every couple of days. This is the state being cruel. Now, we're meant to be ruled by the rule of law, and he should be treated. Has he committed a crime? Look, in my view, I don't know that, but even if he has, for his social media posts, it wouldn't have been a crime in America, what Joel Davis said. Might have been a big mistake on his part, and it might have also been, extremely, unpleasant. Okay, I don't think it was inciting an incitement to violence, but anyway. In Australia, there probably are laws on the books where Joel could be punished for what he'd said. Okay, and he hasn't even been found guilty. I don't even think he's had a court hearing. Okay, he probably will be found guilty for something. Okay, but they are really treating him extremely unfairly. And why are they doing that? They're trying to send a message. If you're like on the extreme right, we are going to come after you, and we're going to ignore what the law says. We're just going to be maliciously punishing you. Now, what do I have in common with Joel Davis? Okay, well, he believes in a big, 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 powerful state, okay, to get his way. What do the libertarians believe if we really boil it down? We believe we can get rid of the state. We believe we can phase the government out entirely, and we have a voluntary society. We believe it'll be a lot more humane, a lot happier, a lot more peaceful, a lot more innovation and prosperity for everybody. Okay, so me and Joel don't agree on much, okay? We're probably at the opposite ends of the spectrum. But, who cares? I don't care if he believes in Marxism. I'd be saying exactly the same thing that I've just been saying to you if Joel Davis was saying, I think the North Korean government's great. If Joel had spent the last 5 years or whatever it is saying, I think the North Korean government's great and we should be just like North Korea, okay? And then he'd said what he'd said online to politicians, okay, then I believe, and he had been treated exactly the same as he is now, I would have said everything in his defence that I've just said to you now if he was a North Korean supporter.
And I think that particular case where they're really throwing the book down and going above and beyond the bounds of the law, it seems, in trying to punish Joel and make an example of him as probably the most high-profile member of the National Socialist Network, clearly outlays, I think, that nationalists, and you might have some quibbles with this, John, but nationalists are the real opposition to the state at the moment, to those in power. They see in those who are critical of multiculturalism, those who are critical of foreign power within our nation, the real enemies, because you have Liberal and Labor on one side almost identical in their support of mass multicultural immigration with no stops, the total commercialization of our society, and the total erasure of anything that you could call Australian culture. Then you have on the other side those who love Australia in a concrete way. They love their family and the people that created this country and built it into what it is. And they see in those people, which Joel represents a certain cohort of, undeniably, somebody who is the true enemy of the state, somebody who really does, on an ideological level, oppose them. I would like to contrast this with leftists. Leftists, every single day, they go out, they put up posters that say, eat the rich, kill your boss. They've got photos of Aboriginal women stabbing Captain Cook now going up. These posters have been spotted around our country. And they can put these posters up with impunity. And you have people that are driving around with ISIS flags in their car and they're ready to go deploy them at their next attack. But if somebody orders a Nazi flag or a far-right book online, they will get raided by the state. If they put out a social media post that is a little bit edgy, they will get arrested and thrown in prison and have everything thrown against them without even being charged, like you said, in the case of Joel. But there are numerous other cases. And recently, we've seen a whole raft of deportations of people that attended peaceful protests, non-citizens, mind you, but they attended peaceful police-approved protests and they didn't commit any crime and they were deported simply for that speech. Yet our government cannot muster the will to deport those who are literally tied to terrorist groups. You've got the ISIS brides, which recently were admitted back into the country. You have refugees that the High Court ruled cannot be kept in indefinite detention and must be admitted into our country despite a long list of criminal behaviour, not just violent criminal behaviour, that are now roaming around our community, and many of them re-offended after that fact. But the only people our government can bring out themselves, our left wing, and I'd include both Liberal and Labor in that government, can bring themselves to deport are the quote-unquote far-right extremists, those with views of Australia as something that we need to protect as a concrete entity, a concrete people with a past, a present, and a future. And that's in contrast with the propositional nation of ideas, and we're all just multicultural people and we've got nothing in common and we're here to just voluntarily exchange capital. And I think you actually have a lot of overlap with us, surprisingly. It's quite an odd alliance between the libertarians and the nationalists because, like you said, we do have great disagreements, a lot of us, with what you stand for. But really, it's anyone that I think loves Australia will find themselves in opposition to the current government. I wanted to extend this a little bit further. Just recently, I think it might have been just the day of this recording, Anthony Albanese has been talking about how he wants to join on with Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister of Canada in banning X in Australia. Now, he says it's for the reason of the image generation software on there producing inappropriate images. What's your thoughts on that, John? Do you think it's for the reason he says? And do you think it has any connection to the rest of this conversation we've been having with the protest bans, gun bans, speech bans, and all that goes in between?
Okay, so there have been over the last sort of week what I have found very harmless, very humorous pictures of, leading public figures, politicians and others in a bikini, okay? And it's funny and it's very harmless. And, court jesters have been mocking political leaders since the time of the pharaohs, okay? It's a fun thing to do, and it's good to be able to ridicule your leaders. Okay, now Mr. Albanese says, and Mr. Starmer has said, we're looking at banning X because of this. Okay, it's degrading. Okay, whatever. Well, the biggest industry on the internet it's the porn industry. It has been from as soon as the internet started. It's porn. Okay, and they don't care one little bit about that. Okay, but so this is not about caring about like being mean to women or whatever, or putting people in bikinis. They hate X. They hate X because it truly is a free speech platform, and you pretty much can say whatever you want there these days, and they hate it. Now, it used to be left-wing X because it used to be run by lefties. They used to have 10,000 content moderators in there who just kick you out if you're right wing. Now that it's free, now that it is a free platform, who's dominating it now with no curation? Right wingers, of course. Okay, so this is why they hate it, and it's a big, big threat to them. Now we've gone very quickly. We've gone very quickly from saying, oh well, we need social media censorship to protect under 16s, from anorexia nervosa and all this other crap. Okay, well, it's gone very quickly from there to, oh, well, now we need to shut down X. The most powerful, look, I know Facebook's got more followers and more people look at Facebook, but they don't really talk about, and they do talk about politics on Facebook, but if you're a public figure and you've got some big announcement to make to the world, where do you put it? Well, you used to ring up the Sydney Morning Herald and say, oh, I've got a scoop for you. You just go on Twitter. Now you go on X and you say, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The US bombed Syria last night. That's a whole other question. But Australia's foreign minister came out and said, well, we support what the US is doing. Okay, I don't want to get into that. Okay, but where did Penny Wong say that? She went to X. She went to X to say it because that's where all the journalists are, the politically interested people are. And it's it's like a Rolls-Royce system. It's a very, very impressive system that, Elon Musk is perfecting. So that they are just after censorship. The weird thing is, John, in the 60s and the 70s, the left was out there being pro-free speech. Now, what did they want free speech for? Porn, okay? It wasn't really, and other distasteful things. They wanted free speech for, it was always sexual related and rainbow related and all this stuff, right? Okay, and they were saying, oh, we've got to stop censorship. We've got to stop censorship, okay, because the right was sort of the establishment back then. But now that and even when we had left-wing leaders like Bob Hawke and Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, those guys in today's world would appear to be, almost right-wing extremists, okay. But now that the left is the establishment, whoever's in the establishment will want to use the power of the state to restrict speech they don't like. And this is look. Tony Abbott, on balance, was, he's better than all the other recent prime ministers we've had. I could talk to you for 2 hours, complaints I have about Tony Abbott. But he's a smart guy, Rhodes Scholar, he gives very good speeches about things. He's a considered guy. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy and he's highly intelligent. So that's a good combination. But then, he's chopped and changed his opinion on free speech 4 times. I put out a social media post recently. When he was opposition leader, he says, you vote for us and we're going to repeal 18C, the Racial Discrimination Act. And we all say, yay, go Tony. He gets in. A year later, certain ethnic communities have said, oh, well, Mr. Abbott, we like this 18C. Then Tony Abbott said, oh, well, I've changed. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and Tony Abbott changes his mind, gives a press conference, says, oh, no, I've changed my mind. 18C is great. Okay. And then he finishes being the Prime Minister. And a year later, he gives a speech at one of these good institutions, the Samuel Griffiths Institute or something, and he says, I look back at my 2 years as Prime Minister, and there were things we can be proud of, but I really do regret not abolishing 18C because free speech is too important to be left as a plaything to the politicians. Fantastic, Tony. But then, a couple of days after Bondi, he's on TV. He's saying, oh, well, 18C is good. It's just got to be applied equally. So they don't have principles. Okay, now, if you really believe in the principle of free speech, it means that no matter what the circumstances are, that you will stick with it. Okay, and you shouldn't chop and change. The problem with I'll tell you about immigration. I was just thinking this the other day. Out of the 2 major parties, why are they both pro-mass immigration? And they still are. Liberal Party's been getting a little bit better, but not much. Now, it's because Labor, like the Democrats in America, like Labor and left-wing parties in Europe, they want recently arrived migrants because they're going to vote left. Can you think of anything more traitorous than that? You're bringing in people because they're going to vote to keep a certain political party in power. It's absolutely disgusting. And this is why Labor is pro-mass immigration. But then the other question is, well, why aren't Liberals? Up until maybe recently, why have Liberals been in favour of it? I'll tell you why, because I spent 30 years inside the Liberal Party. They're all so scared and frightened that the Sydney Morning Herald might call them racist. And they live in fear of this. So because they have this massive fear, because there's been this psyop going on for a couple of generations, that if you're a racist, it's like being a heretic in the medieval period. And so it's the worst thing in the world for a Liberal to be called a racist. The Labor Party people know they're not going to be called a racist because they're pro it all. But the Liberals live in so much fear, even though they would probably prefer there not to be a Department of Multiculturalism, even though they would prefer Australia to keep a largely European Christian culture about it. And even though they'd probably prefer there to be a reduction in immigration, they won't say it because they're so scared. So we have these, for two very different reasons, the two major parties have basically been a joint ticket on mass immigration. Now, this is despite the polls overwhelmingly saying people are sick and tired of it. I bet there's a ton of first and second generation migrants from whatever background who are living in the areas where the new migrants are coming to, and they're saying, hey, well, we don't want any more. We don't want any more. And I also think a hell of a lot of people who've come to this country from non-European background, why did they come here? They didn't come to Australia because they like kangaroos and they like the sunshine and the climate and the national parks. They came here because they did want to live in a European-dominated country, okay? And now a lot of people from their country didn't want to come here, but those particular people came here because they looked at Australia on the TV and in the books and the magazines and whatever and the internet. They say, yeah, that's where I want to live. Okay, so I think even a majority of ethnic people in this country, if you ask them, you said, do you want Australia to sort of maintain a sort of a 2/3, 70% sort of, British European majority permanently? I think a lot of them would say, yeah, well, this is why I came here. A lot of them are Christians. A lot of Chinese come here they have over the last sort of 100 years or so. Before either side of the White Australia policy. In Malaysia and Indonesia, there were small little Christian minorities. They were Chinese people overwhelmingly, and they are really big into church, okay, and they love Christianity. So, yeah, they just sort of had a desire. They thought, I want to live in a Christian country. Okay, well, look, generally speaking, they're going to be good migrants. Now, we don't, and they want to fit in. They want to be part of a Christian community. They don't want to come out here and remake us into something that we're not.
I agree. I'd probably take a little bit of a different rhetorical tact in that I don't think that we need permission from those who are living here that were migrants that we welcomed in, permission to keep our country how we want it. I think that it is our right as Australians, myself and yourself being white Australians, both Christians, to continue and pass on to our kids the country that our forefathers gave on to us. But I broadly agree with your point, the point being that they don't want to see it change so rapidly in such a, I'd say, disastrous way, in a way where and this is a big point for nationalists, of course, in a way where we're being replaced and we no longer will continue to live on this continent if Liberal and Labor have their way and continue with the mass immigration agenda. So I think that sort of really brings us to the end of that. Just one more point. I think that part of the reason why X is being considered for banning is because of the proliferation of the anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalist ideas, and also the ideas of national sovereignty, which have just become so popular among the young users on the apps. So obviously we had the under-16s ban. The pretext was it was mental health. It was to get kids off of app and concentrating in the classrooms and things like that. Now we have the X ban under the pretext of bikini pictures, apparently. But what is sort of going unsaid is just recently a study was published in which it says 40% of young Australian boys are quote-unquote right-wing extremists. I think those numbers are fake. I think that the study has a lot of flaws in it, and that's also very leading terms as well, saying that those who have certain beliefs are extremists out of the gate without any proof that they have any intent of violence or even views that are unpopular in society today. Neither here nor there. The proliferation of free speech on these apps, the liberalization of Instagram, of YouTube even, especially X, I think X really led the way. And that sort of, you love this, but the free market led the other apps, Instagram and YouTube and TikTok as well forced the more restrictive platforms to become a bit more lax. And so you've just seen an absolute explosion of memes and videos, long form, short form content, all talking about how our country is controlled, or our countries, the West, has fallen under the control of certain foreign nations. And it's, I'd say the big culprits are China and Israel for Australia, really. And you sort of have on either side of politics, if you're with the Liberals, probably a bit more of that Israeli control. If you're with China, a little bit more, if you're with Labor, a bit more Chinese influence there. But that's beyond the realms of this discussion. And then the other topic is, of course, mass immigration. We just had the biggest protest against mass immigration this country might have ever seen with the Marches for Australia. Australia Day is looking to be even bigger turnout as long as the police don't suppress it and the state governments aren't able to suppress the marches. But it's looking to be an even bigger success. And that is really terrifying to those who have made their career from playing the political game, selling out Australians, and gradually replacing them. In your worldview with alternative voters, in my worldview with a whole different ethnic, a whole different race of people or races, making Australia completely unrecognisable, multicultural, and completely fractured. So I think that's really the reason that we're seeing the moves to ban X, to ban social media for under 16s. And although it might not be directly tied to the Bondi massacre, I think it is broadly indicative of the anti-free speech, anti-right-wing, really, movement from our governments. Now, unless you had anything more to add, I know that you did want to touch a little bit on Trump. And when we were discussing before this podcast, you did say that he's becoming a bit of a Roman emperor. I don't think you meant that as a compliment, although it could be read as such in some instances. Unless you had anything else to add on the topics of the freedom restrictions, do you want to talk about your take on the recent Trump Venezuela abduction?
Look, I think I'll always quite like Trump, okay, in terms of his personality, because he's a funny bastard. And I like his bluster, and I like his confidence, and he's funny, okay. Now, and I've actually liked him since the 1980s, okay. And I've never watched a reality show. I always find I wouldn't even know what Big Brother is or all these other things, but I did watch the first 2 episodes of Trump on The Apprentice, and I just thought he was a really cool guy. This is when he wasn't political. Now, then when he ran for president in 2015, I just thought, I was heavily involved in the Liberal Party, and I was just telling people and me that this guy's fantastic. I didn't think he'd win, but I just thought, look, what he's saying, because he was talking about building the wall against, the southern invasion, and I just thought, this is after all the neocons, the Bushes and the Obamas and everything, and I was really pro-Trump. And then I was thrilled when he won in 2016. And then, about 2 years later, my mates in the right wing of the Liberal Party catch up and they say, oh, yeah, well, I like Trump too. Now, they were the people who were telling me I was a moron for supporting him so loudly in 2015. And then I believe he had the election stolen in 2020. And then I was delighted and thrilled when he won in 2024. And one of his big things was, he says, well, we're not going to be the world police anymore. We're not going to go and do regime change. Now, what's happened with Trump? Even though I like him a lot, okay, he's not an intellectual. I doubt he's read a book since high school. He's just not that type of a guy. He's got good instincts. He's got amazing instincts, okay, but he's absolutely not an intellectual. And so what's happened is in his first term, he'd lost the popular vote to Hillary, and he'd only just won, and they declared they starting to impeach him straight away and everything. And they're just, making life very difficult for him. But in this and then they I believe they invented COVID to get rid of Trump. Okay. But anyway, in this term, he's won the popular vote. He almost got, I think he's very close to getting more than 50% of the vote, and he's got a very tight team around him. In his first term, he had half of his cabinet resign and write books and say he's an idiot. He had 3 chiefs of staff quit, and John Bolton quit, saying, "Oh, Trump's a moron." No big resignations this occasion, except for that idiot Dan Bongino. But that's another story. And so he's now in this really, after all the unbelievable crap they've thrown at Trump for the last 10 years, he's now in this super strong position. And I believe what's happened to him, because he's not an intellectual, and he's not committed like the Argentinian president to really make the government a hell of a lot less powerful than it is. He's just become sort of drunk with egomania. And he just thinks it's fantastic to go around and sort of become the world police. And look, I thought this Greenland thing was a joke, but and I thought he was joking. I thought it was a brain fart. After the Venezuelan thing, where Trump, is just that, all national leaders, all politicians become egomaniacs, okay, with the one exception of myself. But political leaders like a premier or a prime minister, they just inevitably you're going to become an egomaniac. But being the president of the United States and the most powerful military in the history of the world, and the most powerful economy, and Trump was already a massive egomaniac, and now you've added that on top of him, being the president of the United States and in a strong position, politically strong position. I don't think it'll last past the midterms. I think they're going to get their head kicked in over Epstein and other things. But right now he's in this ultimately strong position, and he's just saying, oh, yeah, we can knock over Venezuela. Greenland, you're next. And he said, I don't care about NATO. Well, I'd be happy if they got out of NATO, by the way. But, this it's just what happens. This is why we actually want to phase the government out eventually, John, because the state will always create egomaniacs who want to go too far. And that's where we're at right now.
So will private corporations as well, though. We have to keep that in mind. So does any position of power.
Well, okay. So let's say you're the CEO of Coca-Cola. Yeah, they've got egos, but they don't have an army that can go around and smash people up. They've only got power because they're making a product that millions of people voluntarily say, I want that product. Have my money in exchange for your product. It's a very, very different type of ego. Okay. The state has got all these weapons and has got the military and intelligence agencies, which they can deploy against people. Big difference, John.
I won't go too much into the libertarian debate. We've sort of done that before. I will say, you do have private citizens becoming more involved in military production. You could say Musk's with his SpaceX, that's something that has military capacity eventually. He needs a national security clearance in order to operate. And you've got, for example, the Palantir technology from Peter Thiel, AI, all these things. Power wherever it's vested, if there is access to sort of hard power, which anything to do with weaponry or intelligence, anything like that is, you're going to have a similar situation. I don't think it's exclusive to the state. I don't think that the state is uniquely villainous in that way. But sorry, continue about Trump. We won't go into it too much.
Well, look, I put out a tweet last week and said, look, I'm off the Trump train. Now, I'd written a book called Make the Liberal Party Great Again. Okay, that's, when I was hoping we could turn around the Liberal Party. But why did I call it Make the Liberal Party Great Again? Obviously, it was, not very soft dog whistle to Trump, okay? Because I just thought I really admired him. And look, I do have to say in Trump's defense, am I glad he beat Kamala Harris? Of course. He has plugged the southern border. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. America was going to get destroyed, and the Democrats were deliberately engineering that the criminals and the worst people, the poorest people it wasn't just South America, they were coming over from Afghanistan and China and every bloody where. So thank God that Trump stopped that, okay? And thank God Trump just comes out and says, global warming's bullshit. Okay, beautiful. And the transgender stuff, he's ended that insanity. Okay, and he's done lots of good things. Okay, but look, the Epstein thing was a massive turning point. And
are you just jealous that you didn't get an invite to the island, John? That's what a lot of people on Instagram are saying. If we criticize Epstein, it's just because we weren't moving in those circles. Are you just saying that because you didn't get an invite?
Well, that thought's never crossed my mind.
No, sorry. I'm being stupid. I'll let you get back to it.
No, but look. I don't think there's much doubt, what Epstein was. It was, I'm going to use the words of Dan Bongino before he went into the FBI. It was a Middle East intelligence agent, a scheme that had been developed. That's the term he used. Okay?
Fair enough.
Yeah,
it's beautifully non-specific, but continue.
And I don't think it was Oman, okay, and I don't think it was Morocco.
No.
That's clearly what it was, okay. People have known that for a long time. The evidence is overwhelming. And who were the people saying, stop investigating Epstein? Okay, the same people. Anyway, so that was a massive disappointment. Now, from a libertarian point of view, what was also a massive disappointment was, and remember during the Epstein thing, Trump says, if you shut up about Epstein, I don't want to hear it anymore. If you're MAGA and you crap on about saying I'm not doing the right thing on Epstein, you're no longer MAGA. I don't want your support. Okay, that's pretty hardcore. Now, the other massive thing, even more important, is the Doge, which you probably won't agree with, Mr. Lawson. But the US does have a $38 trillion debt. This is unbelievable. After the 1990s, Reagan and then Newt Gingrich during the 80s and the 90s, put in place policies that eventually basically paid off the US debt before 9/11. Then we got war on terror, global financial crisis, COVID BS, and now just runaway spending. And so the US has got a $38 trillion debt. Geez, sounds like a boring figure to most people, but let me believe you, it's going to cripple America. And Musk comes in and says, we've got to tackle this bloody debt or it's going to kill us. And Trump says, yep, we're going to do the Doge. The Department of Government Efficiency, and they're going to cut stuff back. Well, after Venezuela last week, Trump gets up there and says, we already spend $1 trillion a year on the military. We're going to bump it up to $1.5 trillion. This is just insane. This is just completely insane.
He invented the idea of printing more money. I can't believe no one's thought of it before.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So the US already spends on defence. There's if you ranked every country in the world about how much they spend on defence, well, obviously the US is first. But then the next 9 countries, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UK, England, Britain, all these countries, you add up the next 9 combined, still less than what the Americans spend on it. So why would they want to go from 1 trillion when they got all this goddamn debt? Why would they want to go to 1.5 trillion? It's just because Trump, this is why I say he's like a Roman emperor. He says, we're just going to rule the world. Okay. Now, the greatest American president, was probably Calvin Coolidge, but besides that, it was probably George Washington himself. And he set the precedent of stepping down after 2 terms. That was a convention up until the 1950s, and it was George Washington that set the precedent. It was a magnificent precedent. I would encourage the viewers, before they go to bed tonight, to watch George Washington's farewell address, or read it, sorry. And he spent about at least a third of it, if not half of it, on, hey, America, we've got a good thing happening here. I've enjoyed being your president. I've enjoyed being the general that helped us win the independence from Britain. I'm off to retire. But can I just beg you, please, America, don't meddle in other countries' affairs. Trade with them, invest with them, have good relations one-on-one like individuals, but the government of America should be strictly neutral. And he said, we can be a city on a hill. We can show the rest of the world how successful we can be if we don't do military alliances with other countries. And that would have been a much better thing to do. And America did do that, for about a century and a half until World War I. Then they were very cranky about World War I, and they returned to, not meddling. And this is why libertarians, our favourite country in the world is Switzerland, because Switzerland said 500 years ago, we're not going to meddle in other countries' affairs. And you know what? No one messes with Switzerland. They don't want to. You had the Napoleonic Wars. 5 million people died across Europe for over a quarter of a century. Everyone leaves Switzerland alone. World War I comes along, 20 million dead, bodies piled up everywhere. Everyone just leaves Switzerland alone. They didn't even think about it. Adolf Hitler comes along in World War II. Takes over various countries in Western Europe, takes over all of Eastern Europe, leaves Switzerland alone. The Soviets that got in the Cold War, the Switzerland's, near the eastern border. Soviets weren't interested in it. Why? It's because they just said, we don't do war. And everyone said, okay, that's cool. That's cool. When I used to go to pubs a lot when I was in my 20s with the boys, in my 20s, once or twice a year, there'd be a misunderstanding at 1 o'clock in the morning, and some guy might sort of muscle up against me. And I just got out of it every time. I say, oh, man, I'm sorry, I apologise. As soon as you just say, I apologise, everyone says, oh, okay, cool, it's over. And what's the point of getting into a bar fight? Okay, oh, I've got to defend my honour. Yeah, you might end up with a teeth knocked out for the rest of your life. So if you just de-escalate, our Lord Jesus taught us this. De-escalation is generally the best thing, and so this is what America could. Could you imagine how successful America would be if they didn't try and meddle around the world? Look at all the technology that they've got. They could have 10 times better technology. They could be a model for the rest of the world. But what's happening now is, various American governments, with all the bombing campaigns that just don't end. I mean, Trump went and dropped a serious amount of bombs on Syria yesterday, barely made the news. Why did it barely make the news? Well, because it happens so often. So they are the world police, and it just makes people hate them. That's what it does. That makes people hate them. So this is why the US Libertarian Party is on the right track. We basically say, we can have a peaceful world. I think that's probably where, myself and someone like Joel Davis disagree. I believe humanity can live on this planet peacefully. Okay, now Joel says we've got to fight our enemies. It's the same message as the neocons. The neocons, I say, look, if we actually phase the state out, okay, and we have, we can have private communities that can have people in there that they want and so forth, but we don't have a big, powerful central state with a big arsenal to get its way, because the people who gravitate to wanting to control the state are always the baddies.
I think you make a lot of good points. I want to draw a bit of delineation here. I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate for Trump on some of the points here, just as a bit of a thought exercise, because I do agree on a lot of your points. I think that in most cases we can avoid conflict. I think that Fortress Australia, sort of in the model of Switzerland, is something to aim for, partially because if we're a country that is principally opposed to meddling in foreign affairs, it will also disincentivize foreign countries meddling in our government, and that's
100%.
something that we've got a big problem with at the moment.
Great point.
If we're not somebody that can even be convinced into going and fighting someone else's battle, well, what's the point for them, right? It's a stupid investment. Now,
that's right. Like just on that, just let me interrupt. In Switzerland, you do not have foreign spies in there trying to meddle Swiss foreign policy because they don't have a Swiss foreign policy.
Yeah, no, exactly. That is one thing that is a great point. I do also want to make a point, though. What if we had, for example, a China that was all the way down in Papua New Guinea or in New Zealand or something like that, as you could say is probably the case with Venezuela. It's somewhat analogous. If we did not respond, if we didn't do something about that, whether it was a matter of just an act for show in order to deter further aggression, or it was something like with the Maduro case, where it was basically a bloodless kidnapping that quickly toppled the government, or at least removed the head of state, and sent a really powerful message. Do you think that would only incentivize further encroachment from our adversaries? Like you said, we might see a Chinese Napoleon in the coming century. Would we want to be sending out a message that our enemies in our region can antagonize us, can send drug boats out to send narcotics into our country, can threaten us with their cartels, and we will do nothing? Do you think that would have a more negative effect than the problems of interference in those countries?
The neocons have invented the Chinese bogeyman as this great threat. Now, the Chinese have become capitalist in the last 30, 40 years. They've therefore become wealthy. They're basically fascists. Okay, but they're not expansionists. They border about 16 countries. They don't have good relations with a lot of them. There's no way in the world they're going to invade Australia. Because we're a very, very long way away. Okay, and they've got other. If they wanted to invade, there's many, many others in their naval, but they don't want to invade. Okay, they've never really have in their history. The neocons want to frighten people. Say, we've got to keep spending on defence because China's going to invade us. Oh, yeah. Okay, but we should. It would be very reckless and foolish, and it would be unpatriotic if we didn't assume someone's going to invade us at some point. So what do we do about that? Well, firstly, we have the right to bear arms. Secondly, we should get a nuclear capacity. Okay, we should have nuclear bombs. Okay, because then, and if we were like Switzerland, say, look, we're not going to attack anyone. These are purely defensive. Okay, and then Trump says one of the reasons he went into Venezuela is human rights abuses. And it's bad in Venezuela. After they went socialist, 8 million poor people have had to walk out, the poor bastards. I feel very, very sorry for them. It's a very, very bad government. But there's no nation in the world today that has worse human rights abuses than North Korea. You've had about the population of Australia almost living in a concentration camp for 70 years. But why does no neocon ever talk about smashing up North Korea, invading North Korea? Nuclear weapons, okay? And so it's a massive deterrent. No one messes with you when you've got nuclear weapons. So that is, if we can prevent the invasion. Firstly, we can prevent an invasion by having goodwill, good relations with all countries. We shouldn't be putting trade sanctions on any countries. We shouldn't be going to war with any countries. We shouldn't have military alliances with any other countries. Then we'll become a very prosperous country, happy country. We can invest in other countries if they allow our investors to go in there, and we can trade with them. Every country wants to trade with you. And we can become a very wealthy, successful, happy, prosperous country. We can be a city on a hill. We can be an example to the rest of the world. Then we have the right to bear arms, and then we just openly tell the world, look, we've got a nuclear arsenal, so no point messing with the Aussies. You don't need to worry about it. We're not going to let a bomb off on anybody because we're happy with everybody.
Do you reject the concept of hemispheric defence altogether, or the idea that we need to be basically controlling our region in order to ensure our defence? Do you think that we can remain only within our borders? And although, we do have a bit of a unique geographic situation where we are so empty that a potential invader would not have the same situation in America where it's so heavily populated. Nonetheless, do you think that we can just say, anyone, we'll trade, we'll be nice with everyone, but we're not going to care even if you come all the way onto our doorstep? We have no reaction whatsoever in those cases?
Well, I reckon the technology is going to, if we can sort of put more of our focus into, dynamic innovation, I believe, give it 2 or 3 centuries from now, I believe we will have worked out how to use the ocean to irrigate the Australian outback. Okay, I know they can do desalination at the moment. It's very expensive and it's very small scale. I might be wrong, but look. So what the point of saying that is, I believe Australia is very, very similar in land size to the continental United States. So we have immense potential. Okay, now if there was, Indonesia is a very big country. It's really weird how we're right next door neighbours, but we've just got everything we're opposites on. We're a Christian country, they're a Muslim country. Okay, we're a developed country, they're an undeveloped country. They know they're developing, but they're still poor compared to us in a big way. And we're a big desert island, and they're a million little tropical islands. Okay, but we're right next door to each other. But you know what? I like our relations with Indonesia because we don't try to become friends. We don't want to be enemies. We basically do trade and investment, but we don't sort of go and have summits together and military alliances. I think something happened recently. But that's the way it should be, because across history, neighbours have ended up hating each other more than anybody. The English and the Irish, the Germans and the French, the Russians and the Poles, So neighbours do tend to hate each other. Now, I like the fact that we don't hate Indonesia, and I don't want to have a big strategy about how we can have better relations with Indonesia. I just basically want to sort of, you do you, we'll do us, and I want our business people. That's very libertarian of you. Yes, I want our business people to invest. And if they want to invest here, no problem. Some restrictions, of course. But our tourists can go there. Their tourists can come here. Happy. So no, there's what are we going to do? Occupy and if we had bad relations with Indonesia, it could be very detrimental to this country. If they really were hostile to us, well, then they could they could send down 5 million refugees if they wanted to. So no, I think if we get armed up. The citizens armed, we get nuclear bombs, we have a thriving economy, and we don't have enemies around the world, well, we'll be the Switzerland of the South Pacific. And then we can be a role model to the rest of the world.
I think you make a lot of good points. That's something that I don't know that we will be able to disagree with. Agree on, in that I do think that there is a legitimate use of state power in what Trump's doing in Venezuela. I will just wrap this up with one last thought experiment for you. You said that these foreign wars have been very costly because they were not to America's benefit. And I agree with all the Middle Eastern cases. Those were not fought in America's interest. And I think that the historical record, even as so much as we have right now, which is probably minuscule compared to what we will see in future as time goes on, has not been fought in America's interest. However, in the case of Greenland, for example, an expenditure to buy out Greenland, which would probably be somewhat less costly. I don't know that there will be military invasion. I think that seems quite unlikely. It seems like more so a peaceful exchange, yes, bolstered by the fact that America is the largest military, and if they don't give it over, they're not going to be able to defend it. What do you think of the fact that global shipping routes around the North Pole are going to be opening up, and trade there will probably be very profitable because you'll be able to shorten routes between America, Europe, and Russia, and various other countries, and the potential monetary benefit that could bring to the American economy in return for purchasing Greenland?
Well, look, the Greenland situation is very interesting. Okay, now, it's about 2/3 the size of Australia. It doesn't look like that on world maps, but that is the land size. It has a population of less than 30,000 people. That's smaller than the average suburb in Sydney or Melbourne. And it has the highest, of that 30,000 people, there's a few Danes there, but it's mainly Indigenous people. They have the highest suicide rate in the world. They have the highest alcoholism rate in the world. So it's a pretty bad little situation there. And if I was a Greenlander and Trump's just offered them all $100,000 US, I believe that's his opening pitch. He should offer them more. I would accept it, because then I'd say, wow, I'll become an American citizen. I can go and live in Miami or California or New York or wherever the hell I want. And he's going to give me $100,000. And what I would personally think is a hellhole. However, all the indications are that there's nobody in Greenland that wants to do this deal. And it's officially a territory part of Denmark. So I don't know why they don't want to do it, but they don't want to do it. There's not many of them. Now, if it's just about money and defence, I'm pretty sure the Americans can go in there, the mining companies and whatever, fishing companies, they can just go in there and, they can sort of look for minerals. I don't think there's been any impediment on that. I think there's already about 5 NATO bases in Greenland, which are US bases. Okay, now you did disappoint me there, Mr. Lawson, where you said that you think the North Polar ice cap's going to melt. Well, that's BS. It's more likely to freeze up more. So don't fall for the global warming bullshit, please. But the issue here is this. Okay, Trump has been saying repeatedly, particularly post-Venezuela, that if the Greenlanders don't agree voluntarily to, become a territory of the United States, they can't be a state with 30,000 people. They can be like Guam or Puerto Rico. He says he's going to take it. Okay. Now, why? What? He's already got all the military he wants there. He could go and have a chat with them and say, look, can you let our mining companies make it a bit easier for them to go and prospect here? I'm sure that they'd prefer that than invasion. Okay. So, no, there's only one reason Trump wants to do this. He's thinking, when I'm retired back in Mar-a-Lago, I want to look at the map of the US and I want to say, look, I made Greenland part of the United States. It's pathetic ego. There's nothing in it. I heard him yesterday say, well, we've got to stop the Russians and the Chinese. If we don't take it, the Chinese and the Russians will take it. I don't think so. Have a look at the world map. China is a long way away from Greenland. Now, Russia is possibly viable or possibly realistic that they could move in there. I think Russia's got enough on it. I don't think Russia's going to want to go that close to the US and Canada. I think they're having enough. I think they're having enough. They've got a bit of trouble with Ukraine, yeah, like you said. So if he goes and takes Greenland, then yes, he's going to be like Emperor Trajan. He's just going to say, what's next? What's next? What's next? There's been lots of empires in the last 5,000 years, John. Lots of empires. Okay. And an empire is not just a powerful country. It's one that, geographically expands. Okay. And often when they reach the zenith of their geographical expansion and they just feel like they're king of the world, half of them said, I'm actually not a leader. I'm not an emperor or a king. I'm God. That's what they said half the time. When they reach their geographical zenith, not always, but often that's the beginning of the implosion. America's got pretty serious domestic challenges. I've mentioned the debt, huge, which no one thinks about, but there's urban decay in a big way across America. If you went back to the 1950s or the 1960s, the average small town in America was thriving and booming, okay, with low crime rates and expanding industry, and people, there was a good civic feeling there. Now, there's a hell of a lot of middle America is in a bad way. But Trump's out there like Emperor Trajan saying, oh, yeah, let's go and take Greenland. There's no rationale for it except for his pathetic ego.
I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Even though I definitely do agree with some of the rationale, at the end of the day, I really do think that you're right on that motivation. You might have nailed it right there. But that pretty much brings us to the end of the podcast. There are many, many things we disagree on and many things we do agree on. But I think that this has been a really interesting conversation. I think that we covered a lot of topical stuff here. John, would you like to tell the audience where they could find more about the Libertarian Party and maybe your social media content if they'd like to further pursue your ideas?
Well, I'm active on X at John Ruddick 2. I think we've got,
Have you posted many bikini pictures?
No, that's not my thing. I like them, but and look, I think we're on pretty much all the social media. The one that is sort of the mothership is the X account. Then we've got various libertarian. We've got the Federal Libertarian Party website, and then we've got the New South Wales Libertarian Party website. But look, if you really want to get your teeth into deep libertarian philosophy, I would encourage people to follow the Dave Smith podcast in the United States. He's probably the most well-known, public libertarian probably in the world at the moment. And so, yes, that would be. If people want to read a book, about radical libertarianism, and it'll only take you about 2 hours. I'm guessing a lot of your viewers have heard of Ayn Rand, who is often considered the goddess of capitalism. Again, I like Ayn Rand, but there was she was a big deal after writing Atlas Shrugged in the 1960s, quite a prominent public figure, controversial, but she had this group of intellectuals around her, and a part of them broke away and went further than Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand said we should have a government. She said we should be a very, very small government, and she said it should be voluntary taxation. I don't know how that works, but that's what she said. And she said the government only got 3 legitimate purposes: national defence, the courts, and the police. Okay, well, if I could live in that society, I'd be very, very, very happy. Okay, but there was another guy who was initially a big fan of Ayn Rand, ended up having an acrimonious dispute called Murray Rothbard. And he said, you know what, we can actually have a society without any government whatsoever. Now, a lot of your viewers, almost all of your viewers are going to say, wow, that's so wacky. That's so crazy. I'm not even interested in hearing about that. Okay. Murray Rothbard wrote a lot of books, probably 20 books. But the best introduction to anarcho-capitalism, where we say we can abolish the state or phase the state out entirely, and it's available on the internet for free. It was written, I think, in the early 1970s. It's called Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. It's only 61 pages. It's a very good little introduction to the most purest form of libertarianism, which I am increasingly attracted to, called anarcho-capitalism. And I believe that's what's going to preserve life on this planet. I think as long as we have governments around, and as long as we have egomaniac politicians running those governments, which is an inevitability, some bastard over the next 1,000 years, John, is going to start a nuclear war. And we're going to be back to the Stone Age. That's going to be a really bad thing, because I actually like the world. I like people. I like humanity. And I think we can eventually, I think Elon Musk is right, we can go to the stars. Okay, but these nuclear bombs and these politicians in control of them, they're going to, some psycho is going to come along at some point and, end it all for us. We can't let that happen. And it's going to happen. I believe, it's not like we can go through that. We might get through to the year 10,000 AD. That's still a blink of, a very short period of time when you're talking about the universe. So I think it's quite possible I know that the scientific consensus out there is that the universe is teeming with life, or at least there's other life out there. Now, we know, it's basically unlimited, the universe. So even if there's just a small amount of life, a small percentage of life out there, it means that, the scientists say, well, there's got to be civilizations out there somewhere that are more advanced than ours. Okay, look, they're probably right. But I have this hunch that the entire universe is sterile. And that's why I sort of think there is something going on with God. There's something we can't understand, some higher force. And I sort of think, and there's no evidence there's any life anywhere else in the universe. Now people just do the calculations and say, 70 trillion billion zillion stars, and most of them have got 10 planets, so someone's going to have done it. Okay, they're probably right. But I have a feeling, that this little blue dot, this is it. And as long and we until we find evidence that, and I'm all up for looking for other life, but they've been looking pretty hard for 70 years. They cannot find a thing. Every couple of years, someone says, we heard this funny little electro light. It could be an intelligent source. It never is. It's always crap. So if the whole universe is sterile and we're here and we're the only thing going, okay, well, I think we've got an obligation to just make sure we don't blow ourselves up. And I think we've got an obligation to, basically bring about world peace and get out there and start to sort of work out how we can colonize the rest of the universe.
I'm all for it. I volunteer to go on the first spaceship. But thank you for joining us, John. Very much appreciate that. I encourage anyone that wants more of our podcast, they check out thenationalobserver.co and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we also have the written publication over at thenationalobserver.co. Have a great rest of your week, John.
Thanks for having us, John. Really enjoyed the chat. See you, mate.